Okay, so let's go ahead and continue on talking about data flow diagrams, since these are the core of the research papers that you will be doing this semester. Well, we were going to until the lamp shut off.
Probably not.
Yeah. Okay. So last time I had you do an exercise related to creating a context diagram, also called a primitive diagram. And so the distinguishing features of a primitive or a context level diagram is that you just have one process that represents the whole system, and you write something in there like, you know, ice cream, inventory, system, whatever it is. You'll be picking some aspect of a business, probably some significant process in a business as the system that gets some type of work done. It's going to take in some data and then have some type of outputs. And so as part of a context level diagram, you have some entities that provide some data to the system, and out comes other forms of data. And so there's your level zero, or sorry, your context level diagram. From there, you deal with your level 0 diagrams. So you should have the exact same entities and the exact same data sources. Oops. All right, this is supposed to be a rectangle, and this is supposed to be a process. Maybe I should just do circles so you can see the difference a little better. So you use the diagramming that comes in there, but in terms of my diagramming, I don't seem to be making the curvy boxes versus the rectangles as good as I could. So I'll call this a process, and this will be 1.0. Okay, so what does this imply that I drew there? As you look at that and you look at that, if that is an extension of that, what does it imply? What does it tell you?
There's more process.
Okay. Yeah, okay, there's more going on than just that one thing. Anything else?
More processing.
Pardon?
More processing.
There's a lot of steps to it. Anything else?
It's moving different data each time.
Okay. You notice that hopefully between each step you've transformed the data in some way. Now, according to the rules that you see in the slide deck that I gave you, it says that that is a requirement. I think that's preferable, but not a requirement, because sometimes we'll be moving things in and out of data stores and we haven't necessarily changed it at all. Particularly as you look at old processes that are going on in an organization, you'll see a lot of handing around the same data all over the place, and they're not necessarily improving on it. But in an idealized world, you would get a lot of, it would change through each step, and therefore you have a purpose for a process existing. Hopefully, you will have about, somewhere between 5 and 6 main processes. So here's an example going over the same ideas. Another thing that I would note for you is there's balance in terms of the inputs and outputs. So even though the original diagram has just one system box there, and this one has 4 different main processes, it still has the exact same inputs and outputs going to the entities from the system, speaking as a whole. So if I go up a few, I see there's a customer order going in from the customer and a receipt going out. If I go down here, same thing. Customer orders going in, receipts going out. Kitchen receives a food order, that's it. And the manager receives reports, that's it. So even though there's a lot going on here, same thing happens. Kitchen gets a food order, manager gets management reports. So there's more detail going on in the system than what originally appeared, but you get the same stuff going on. What you want to avoid is, as you go from your context level diagram down to your more detailed diagrams, you don't want to have some of these processes, or sorry, some of these data flows disappearing. You don't want to have some of these data flows appearing that weren't in the original diagram. And so that's the balance that we're talking about. You can go down into even further depth. Decomposition is the word we use. So for any one of these processes, you can explode it. That's some other terminology we use, which means we drill down on a particular process, and it can have as much detail as this diagram. You go down as many levels as you need to. Questions so far? Here on this level 0 diagram, and it's called a level 0 diagram because it indicates all the main processes followed by a 0. It's not really a great name. You would think the context level diagram would be the level 0 diagram, but it's not. It's the first set of numbers, dot something, as the level 0 diagram. After that, you get to a level 1 diagram, in which case, if we were going to look at a level 1 diagram, we would break apart. If we broke apart 4.0, we would go from the diagram would hold from 4.1 to 4 point whatever, and that's it. There wouldn't be any other 3s or 5s considered. There wouldn't even be a 4.0 in the diagram. It'll just, a decomposition of 4.0 as a level 1 diagram will have 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, and we'll see an example of that. Oh, one other thing is the presence of data stores. So from hopefully this came up in the rules that you were looking at, but where is it okay to have data stores and where is it not okay to have data stores according to the rules?
In between process.
Pardon me?
In between process. Or in between something.
Well, they should be in between processes, but as it relates to the different types of diagrams, can a data store show up on a level 0 diagram? Can it show up on a level 1 diagram? Yes. How about level 2?
Yeah.
How about off into infinity?
Sure.
Yes. Okay. How about on the context level diagram? No, that's the only place it can't go. So this is your context diagram. It's not supposed to be there, but it can show up anywhere else. Okay, last time I gave you a handout, and I'm going to stop and we're going to try and go through that. What?
Yeah.
It's probably be any minute now. Okay. I'll let you in on a little secret here.
Thanks.
In terms of checking your work later on, if you open up that data flow diagram slide deck and get near the end, there should be this diagram, and it's about IBM Corporation. Updating a contract in some way, and I loosely based, so I made some changes to it, but I loosely based it off of this example, so if that matters. So you can look at that, and then I made up my own while you guys were doing it, and I'm not going to promise that mine is the only way to do it or the best way to do it. So the first thing I did was I decided to make a context level diagram so that I'd know what to balance out, and through the reading of the problem it looked like I needed to, all I needed was some purchase information coming in and a contract coming out, roughly speaking. I mean, these are ultimately communication tools, and so hopefully you could look back to the story problem and say, yeah, from reading the story problem, maybe the words are a little bit different than what was in the story problem, but yeah, that effectively conveys what happened. And then that's what I had for the second part. The one thing that I was kind of waffling a little bit on was whether to create 1.0 or not. I don't, just because of the way I wrote the problem, I think I had intended for you not to do that step, but because I was very overt in the way that I was mentioning every single process, calling it, there's the log request process, there is the determine interest rate process, and so I was just trying to signal to you in very obvious language that, you know, every single time there was a process that was going to show up, and then I was trying to talk about the data that went between them, but that one wasn't clearly signaled. But as I was reading it carefully, I thought, it kind of sounds like that needed to happen. Anything in there look weird to you? You want to ask me, why would you do it that way?
Can you put one salesperson and, like, after 6.0, can you do like a big line that goes back to that, so it'll be like a circle?
Yes, you can draw a line back. I think one of the instructions or best practices that's given in this slide deck is to only have one, like no repeating of entities on the on your diagrams. However, that's one of the things that I don't agree with. It's a communication tool, and sometimes the diagram gets too complicated for you to. It just looks awkward to have sometimes. After you go through all this stuff, maybe there's some information going back to, maybe there's 2 or 3 entities that you started off with. Sometimes it plays out nicely where you can just drop it off at the end to some person, but if it's going back to the original person, you can duplicate it on there for readability.
In this case, it is going back to the original person, right?
Yes, I intended this to mean the exact same person.
Okay.
This person initiated this person got a contract back, which they're going to in turn give to their customer.
So this is what you prefer, rather than having a circle or a line going back?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, you can do it the other way, and it's allowed. It just, yeah. So technically, it's allowed to do that, but why would you want to? It just looks funny. Other questions, problems, issues with what I did? Yeah.
Yours looks a lot better, obviously, than what I was doing. But
okay.
There's a rule K. It said a fork in a data flow means that exactly the same data goes from a common location to 2 or more different processes, and that's what I was trying to do from 3.0 to 4.0 and 5.0. I was trying to get, because they both, it said that they both took the documentation.
No, I did the same thing, and I put an extra line into where it would do a fork, and then it would go back. I kind of know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And then to make it right, I had to just take off the 2 lines, the extra lines.
Oh, I see.
But I mean, I get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I did the same thing.
So, yeah, I thought maybe I was the only.
Because well, what I'm kind of thinking is like the data store has to be in between 2 processes or something. I thought that's why I put an extra line in here as well.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like from the credit check process, there was an extra line going from that to the credit files, and then the credit files to the documentation, or not, or to the other process. Which was wrong.
Yeah, it could have been done a little differently. There could have been, for example, a request made. You could represent somehow a request made out of this process and getting it back in. As far as now, I had not intended for there to be a need for any type of forking. If you think about it as in this case as if it were a snowball. You start off with this piece of data, and it keeps on getting more and more added to it with every single line coming out of a process. That's the way that I was thinking of it. Now, that doesn't mean that it will be that way in the work problems that you create for the places you interview. But in terms of what was in my head, in this case, I was adding on a piece of data every time, and I probably could have improved the problem a little bit because, for example, I said, you know, after this step, I'm going to call it documentation, and then it was documentation again and documentation again. Ideally, I would have liked to have had it be a different name every time, and it struck me after this step, I was like, well, create loan agreement. Well, I must have a loan agreement then, right? And so I said documentation / loan agreement, and then after that, I didn't know what I wanted to call it, but the idea was that, you know, this documentation here now includes the interest rate plus the loan agreement plus the purchase request plus the credit worthiness. So I thought that made sense, and maybe, yeah. I haven't seen all the rules for data flow diagrams, and this is the first time I've given you all of the rules to diagram out as a homework assignment, and so there may be ways of using this that that are within the rules that I haven't done it yet. So your approach may be valid, may not. In this instance, I'm not sure. Anything else? I think I pretty much covered everything I had in there. Okay. Still going strong on my final battery bar. Yep.
It's still going.
All right. I don't want you to necessarily remember everything that's in this slide deck, just the things that I'm pointing out to you. I want you to understand that how you put together a proper context diagram. I want you to understand how to properly put together a level 0 diagram. In particular, the fact that it's balanced in its inputs and its outputs. And I'm sorry I keep on editorializing here. Although I'm going to test you on some of the rules for this, my purpose in teaching you about this is not for you to know every single rule. It's so that you can just do the basics right in the workplace. And the basics include drawing it out this way at this particular level. Okay, I talked about this. I disagree with the formal rules for this. So the inputs to a process are different from the outputs of that process. Like I was showing you an example where it said documentation goes in and documentation goes out. I think that's okay sometimes. And so I just kind of note that, particularly as you look at the as-is process for a lot of places, it's going to be like that. Number 2, objects on a DFD have unique names. Well, yeah, every process should have a unique name, but perhaps the entity can be the entity can certainly be duplicated if it makes the diagram more readable. All right, these are all the rules that you worked on. Hopefully you made some nice pretty diagrams that I could include in the slide deck next year or something. Okay, the idea of decomposition is going down into deeper and deeper levels for any particular process. So you can, I've showed you level 1, or sorry, level 1, or sorry, level 0, but you can go down as many levels as you need to. Here's an example of a level 1 diagram. So now notice that there's something that's a little bit different about this. And I want you to go to at least a couple examples of a level 1 diagram in your project. What's unique about this diagram compared to the previous diagrams is that when we break apart 4.0 from another diagram, we lose the entities. We lose the sources and sinks because we're just isolating one particular process. Now it still needs to be consistent or balanced in terms of the data inflows or outflows. So I will know immediately that I'm looking at a level 1 diagram or lower just based on the fact that I see arrows coming in and out, not touching anything. But I can read the numbers and I'll know exactly where I'm at. So if we were to look at 4.0 earlier, then we would see that into 4.0 comes this named data, into 4.0 comes this named data, and out of 4.0 comes that named data. But again, there was more detail to that than what was immediately apparent, and so that's the reason to go to this level. And so if you were to then go to a level 2, then that just indicates that for any one of those level 1 processes, you're adding on another decimal point and looking at the 4.3.1, 4.3.2, 4.3.3. You could have just as easily have selected 4.1 and broken that out, or 4.4, or depending on how many steps there were. So you will probably not get to or need to go to level 2. You're probably just fine having level 1. So does that make sense? With our level 0 diagram, we have identified our main processes, hopefully in the neighborhood of 5 or 6 main processes, and one of those you should need to drill down a little farther to describe how it works. Here's an example of making a mistake where they went from their context level diagram with data A coming in, and then they went down to their level 0 diagram, and suddenly they're showing that there's a source 1 and a source 2, and it's providing data A and data C. So they tried to explode out this part, but suddenly they introduced C into the equation, which wasn't there before. So this is just an example of something that went wrong when they went to that next level. Typically what I ask you to do is to have your paper done, your diagrams done early on in the course of your project, and I say, show them to me. And it's readily apparent to me as I glance at your context diagram and look at your level 0 diagram and maybe a level 1 diagram, whether they're balanced. Like that's one of the big things that I'll mark off for on your final paper. But as long as you have it done a few weeks earlier, I'll just glance at it for the big things that I'm going to mark off if they're wrong, and I'll tell you. So visit with me as often as you want. I'm going to give you towards the end of the semester, I'll give you time in every class. Come meet with me, show me your diagrams. If your diagrams look good, then you're probably going to be all right. If your diagrams look bad, I will tell you. But some people will inevitably put off writing their paper till the very last moment, and I will never review it, and you'll turn it in with mistakes in it, and that's a shame because you could have had, in most cases, a whole letter grade higher had you just given me a chance to say, nope, that's wrong, just go fix it. So did you have a question?
So what would you do on the second one? Just take off the source 2? Fix it?
Well, if there really was a source 2 providing a second set of data, then it should have just shown up in the original context diagram, if that was needed. So,
Unless you just added it randomly. And you fix it the other way.
would you want to remove it? Well, it just depends on if this is needed.
Oh. So it just depends.
Yeah, it depends.
Okay.
One of the, now I don't know if you'll remember this or not, or if this is just only going to serve to confuse you. So I'm prefacing this. We might be going wrong here. But one of the things that I've found a little bit confusing as I've talked about this over the years is when do you feature people and when do you not feature people? One of the things that can get a little bit tricky is maybe something comes in from the outside world, a request, and maybe it gets returned to the outside world afterwards. But then when you're reading the description of what's going on, or maybe you pick it up in the interviews, it talks about all kinds of other people, and you think in your head, and maybe they are the source of information, and so oftentimes you think to yourself, oh, I'm at a lower level of detail now. I need to talk about how my internal accountant or my warehouse guy or they supplied me this additional piece of data. But that's not how it's supposed to work. You don't feature people inside the system. You just feature their work task as a process. So if your accountant pulls something out of data stores, just write and I need some name of a process that an accountant would do where they retrieve data.
Create a statement?
Pardon?
Financial statement?
Okay, so say for instance in here it says accountant creates financial statement with data from blah blah blah. So rather than you don't draw the accountant on there. Maybe you have a data store sitting out here somewhere that they pull some data into, but the process, it doesn't matter that an accountant did it. The process is just create financial statement. So there's a reason why sometimes people might accidentally start adding in entities in the middle of something, but you don't need to do that. So if it's from outside the system, put it on the context diagram because that's where it belongs. If it's from within the system, don't point them out as an entity. They're just a process whereby something gets done. This isn't something I've had to deal with on any of the papers so far, but you've recently learned about the rules. So if you want, you could, from a higher level, take payment and coupon, which are really two different data sources, and then as you go down to a lower level, you could split it out. So if that's useful to you, you can use it. I don't really want to get into any advanced things. All I want you to do is communicate things simply with the simplest rules. I don't think that the edge cases are of any value. At a high level, if you're in the business world, the question might come up, when should I stop? Right here it says when it's reduced to about its lowest level. But when do you think you should stop? Let's just talk practically. If you were diagramming something in the real world, a process, not just for my class, but if you were paid limitless amounts of money to spend limitless time on a problem, when should you stop?
When it's a manageable process or a manageable set of
when it gets to common sense, when you just should know that's what's happening.
Sure.
Like when someone's handing a piece of paper to the next guy or something.
Yeah, you probably have some idea of the business problem that you're concerned about, and maybe at a high level, you know that you don't care about. So let's just say you lay out, you've articulated at level 0 processes 1 through 5. And you know that you're not concerned about process 1, 2, and 3, so you could go in there really deep. You could spend days and weeks going really deep into those, but you know that the only thing that you're actually solving or improving or working on is something that's in process 4 or 5. Or maybe it's a subset of that. Maybe it's 4.1 or 4.3. So I just wanted you guys to kind of think about it and think about it practically. So you could document everything in the world, but only do it to the extent that it's useful in the problem that you're solving. Unless I find some other slides in here, this will be about it for the data flow diagrams. This kind of captures the spirit, these two slides right here, of what you're doing with your project. Not to this extreme, mind you, but just at a high level. As a system analyst, diagramming people's processes, you take something that has a lot of parts to it, and you think about it, you think, how could this be better? And you notice the term BPR down there. What do you think BPR stands for? Business process.
Resource.
Re-engineering. So the idea is you might be re-engineering how business does something that they typically do. And so they went, in this case, you can, if you had this other textbook, you could read about how they thought it was wonderful at IBM that they went from using this process to create a new contract to this process, where I think it was, anyway, they ended up saving a ton of time. A lot of it was automated, and so you go from whatever it was, weeks or days to an hour to maybe turn around a contract. So those are the kinds of things you're thinking about with business process re-engineering. And in your projects, what is it that people are doing? How can I fix that? Although typically in your project, you'll probably be, pulling out, step 4, step 1, and going into a little bit of detail and redrawing those diagrams at the level 1 level, saying, hey, this is a better way to do it because they're doing everything paper-based. They ought to have a database, and it'll be shared across everything, and life will be wonderful. So that's kind of vague and abstract at this point, but you'll get it later.
So for the project, we're doing before and after?
Yes. Yeah, so kind of the guts of your project are going to be drawing a before diagram that features this, and you'll just exhaustively talk about it. So, I mean, I can talk about this in conversational language. You might say, well, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but no, you got to write the 1,000 words. So if you were writing about this, you'd say, at IBM, the first thing that they do as part of their contracting process is a salesperson submits a request which is logged as part of a process. After that process, the documentation which consists of a logged request is passed on to a process where creditworthiness is checked. And so you explicitly talk through every single step and every single arrow that's in the diagram. And that's a good chunk of your paper. And you do the before and the after. That's that. All right. And we don't need to know anything else in that slide deck.